Headlights sliced through the misty dawn on Route 302 as cars screeched to a halt. In the middle of the asphalt stood Rusty, a weary golden retriever mother, her tawny coat muddied and thin from neglect. 4 tiny puppies stumbled at her paws, barely old enough to walk. She darted one direction, froze, then dashed back, torn between fear and duty. A puppy lagged behind, collapsing in the middle of the lane as horns blared. Tires squealed, brakes locked, and a patrol cruiser skidded sideways across the road. In that single instant, the officer behind the wheel placed his vehicle between the fragile lives and a rushing tide of steel. What unfolded was no ordinary morning. It was the moment where one man, one mother dog, and a decision none of them could take back collided on a stretch of cracked New England pavement. The scene might have ended in tragedy, but instead it froze into something unforgettable. Imagine a mother forced to choose between survival and sacrifice, with the weakest left behind. Rusty, gaunt and trembling, had carried 3 puppies across, but abandoned the 4th to fate. To her, it was instinct. To the watching officer, it was a cry for help. The air hung thick with tension, headlights glaring like spotlights on the drama unfolding. Passers-by gasped, some filming, others too shaken to move. But the trooper knew hesitation meant death. In that moment, he faced a question that would echo far beyond this road. Would he intervene, breaking the rules of letting nature and neglect run their course? Or would he act, risking everything to give an abandoned creature a chance? That decision, made in seconds, would ripple across lives, human and animal alike, for years to come.
Rusty's ribs showed through her fur, evidence of weeks scrounging for food. She clutched her remaining pups one by one, dragging them across the asphalt toward the safety of tree cover. Each movement revealed her desperation, her paws slipping, eyes darting, heart pounding in terror. But when her weakest pup collapsed mid-road, she faltered. She whined once, head jerking toward the fallen child, then toward the 3 already trembling in the brush. Torn by instincts she could not reconcile, Rusty chose survival. With a low whimper, she turned and disappeared with the others into the tree line, leaving the frailest behind. The abandoned puppy twitched weakly, breath shallow, tiny chest rising against the unforgiving road. It was a cruel choice that nature, and sometimes humans, forced upon mothers. Yet watching it unfold struck deeper than any textbook example. It was heartbreak made real, and it demanded a response. Trooper Thomas Owens had faced car crashes, blizzards, and every kind of emergency the White Mountains could offer in 30 years of service. But nothing prepared him for the sight of that quivering bundle of fur left on the road. Protocol rang in his mind. Stray animals were not his jurisdiction. Intervention could do more harm than good. Yet standing there, hearing faint whimpers over the hum of stalled engines, Thomas felt a weight heavier than rules. Rusty's glance back had pierced him, a mother acknowledging her failure. His heart battled his training, torn between regulation and compassion. Behind him, drivers murmured impatiently. Ahead, one fragile life clung by a thread. Thomas removed his jacket, lowered himself to the pavement, and cradled the limp puppy against his chest. In that instant, his choice was made. For him, neutrality was no longer possible. Humanity had to act.
With the shivering puppy nestled in his jacket, Thomas strode back toward his cruiser. Its small body weighed almost nothing, yet it pressed on him like a stone. The radio crackled, dispatch awaiting his update. He reported the situation, requesting animal rescue assistance. The dispatcher confirmed an officer was en route, but warned him strays often carried illness. Intervention complicated things. Thomas knew all that. Still, he turned the heat high and shielded the tiny creature in his arms. For a moment, the road seemed to fade, the honking cars silenced by the thrum of a faint heartbeat against his chest. He thought of his late wife, Margaret, who had loved animals fiercely, whispering often that every creature deserved a chance. As blue lights approached in his mirror, Thomas wondered if this single act might ripple further than he could possibly imagine. The animal rescue truck pulled in behind the cruiser, its lights flashing, its driver swift and steady. Officer Carla Reyes, seasoned in handling abandoned and injured pets, stepped out with a carrier and blankets ready. She scanned the scene, then met Thomas halfway. Her practiced hands examined the pup briefly, frown deepening at its frailty. Underweight, dehydrated, perhaps hours from collapse. Without hesitation, she tucked the bundle into a lined carrier and hurried to her vehicle. For Thomas, relief mingled with dread. The puppy was safe for now, but its future was far from certain. Carla explained that the rescue center awaited, equipped with veterinary staff and volunteers. Thomas nodded, but as he watched her taillights disappear into the mist, he realized he couldn't simply walk away. Something in him had already bound his fate to this fragile creature's survival.
The rescue clinic smelled of antiseptic and warm straw. Inside, cages housed mewing kittens, injured strays, and abandoned animals awaiting hope. At the center stood Dr. Susan Whitaker, silver-haired, brisk but kind, a woman whose life revolved around second chances. She examined the pup with careful precision, noting each tremor, each shallow breath. "This one's a fighter," she murmured, placing the puppy on warming pads and gently threading an IV line. The name Hope seemed to settle naturally over the fragile life now clinging to survival. Volunteers bustled around, whispering about the roadside rescue. Thomas lingered near the doorway, still in uniform, reluctant to leave. Watching Hope's tiny chest rise and fall, he felt tethered. Something had shifted. He had saved lives before, but never like this. For the first time in years, a flicker of purpose stirred deep within him. That night, Thomas returned to his quiet lakeside cabin. The grandfather clock ticked steadily, echoing through rooms once filled with laughter. His aging golden retriever, Solomon, thumped his tail weakly at the sight of him. As Thomas sank into his chair, jacket still damp, memories pressed in. Margaret's laughter, her tender way with strays she always brought home. Her voice, gentle but firm. Every creature has a story, we just need to listen. The house felt emptier than ever, but tonight, emptiness carried an echo of new beginnings. Thomas reached down, scratching Solomon's graying fur. He whispered softly, wondering if he'd done right, if stepping into that roadside moment had honored Margaret's memory or defied it. Solomon sighed, as though answering. Outside, the lake reflected the pale moon. Somewhere in the night, a dog named Rusty sheltered her surviving puppies, waiting for dawn.
Morning came bright and cold, pulling Thomas back to the rescue center. Inside, the hum of activity was steady. Volunteers tending cages, phones ringing, meals being prepared. Dr. Whitaker greeted him with a weary smile, leading him to the treatment room. Hope lay curled in an incubator, tiny chest rising with more strength than the night before. Around her, other rescues filled the space. A limping collie, an emaciated hound, 2 kittens curled in a single blanket. Thomas absorbed it all, struck by the fragile line between despair and resilience. Whitaker explained the long road ahead, feeding schedules, antibiotics, careful monitoring. Hope was stronger, but still vulnerable. Thomas lingered longer than intended, drawn into the quiet fight for survival around him. Each cage held a story, each animal a chance. Hope's struggle was no longer hers alone, it was his too. Later that day, as Whitaker completed routine checks, she paused. Beneath Hope's skin, a faint mark caught her attention, the trace of a microchip injection, evidence of vaccination months ago. This puppy had once belonged to someone. That meant abandonment, not simple stray birth. It changed everything. Records showed the chip tied to a litter believed to be 5 puppies strong, whelped by a golden retriever matching Rusty's description. If 5 existed and only 4 were seen on the road, another was still missing. The revelation unsettled Thomas deeply. It wasn't just a story of roadside danger anymore. It was neglect, human failure, and a mystery of one unaccounted life. Whitaker cautioned him that the odds were slim, but Thomas's resolve hardened. One lost puppy still cried out silently in the wilderness, and he knew, with certainty, he had to try to find it.
The discovery of the microchip burned in Thomas's mind long after he left the clinic. 5, not 4. A litter incomplete. Hope was safe. Her siblings sheltered with Rusty in the woods, but somewhere out there was one more life, fragile and fading by the hour. The thought gnawed at him, louder than the quiet ticking of the clock at home, sharper than the winter air seeping under the door. Margaret's words resurfaced again, urging him not to ignore stories untold. Most would have turned away, reasoning that survival belonged to the fittest. But Thomas couldn't. He had seen too much already to walk back into silence. The missing puppy had no voice, no guardian, no witness, except him. The decision formed slowly but solidly. At first light, he would return to the roadside where all began and search. Dawn broke gray, clouds heavy with drizzle. Thomas packed his rain gear and set out toward the wooded edge near Route 302. The air was damp, carrying scents of pine, moss, and faint decay. Each step into the underbrush sank into mud. For hours he combed the thickets, eyes scanning for paw prints, ears straining for any sound. His flashlight beam pierced shadows beneath fallen logs and hollow stumps. The forest seemed indifferent, vast and unyielding. Raindrops slid from his hat, soaking through his jacket. Doubt crept in. Perhaps the missing pup had never made it this far. Perhaps it was already too late. But then, faint and broken, a whimper drifted through the drizzle. He froze, heartbeat surging, then pushed forward, branches clawing at his uniform. The sound grew louder, weaker, pulling him closer to a discovery that would change everything.
The whimper led him toward an abandoned barn, sagging against the weight of years. Its roof half collapsed, doors dangling, it reeked of damp straw and mildew. Thomas stepped carefully over warped boards, his beam sweeping the shadows. Mice scurried, wings rustled in the rafters. Then, in the darkest corner, a shiver of movement caught his eye. A tiny golden form lay pressed against rotting wood, half hidden beneath debris. The puppy was smaller than Hope, its fur matted with mud, eyes glazed, body limp but still breathing. Thomas knelt, careful and steady, sliding his shirt around the fragile creature. Its warmth was barely there, a flicker fighting against the cold. As he lifted it gently, the pup whimpered faintly, a cry more spirit than strength. He whispered a name to himself, Faith. For if this one survived, it would be nothing short of miraculous. Faith's body was frighteningly cold against Thomas's chest, her breath shallow and uneven. She weighed almost nothing, as if life itself was slipping away with each raindrop. He hurried back through the forest, boots sliding over slick mud, branches whipping his arms. The rain intensified, soaking both man and bundle until his shirt clung, heavy and sodden. His mind whirled with urgency. Minutes mattered now. He clutched Faith tighter, whispering promises only she could hear. Each stumble, each labored step felt like a battle against time itself. By the time his cruiser came into view through the drizzle, his heart pounded as if he had run miles. Gently he laid Faith on the seat, cranked the heat, and turned the siren on. As tires spun against wet asphalt, he pressed the accelerator. Every second counted. Faith's fragile fight depended on speed, determination, and sheer hope.
The drive to the rescue center blurred into a tense eternity. Rain lashed the windshield, wipers struggling to keep pace, roads slick with danger. Every glance toward the seat sent Thomas's heart lurching. Faith's tiny chest rose and fell erratically, each breath uncertain. Once she shuddered so violently he feared it was her last. When a deer bolted across the road, Thomas braked hard, instinctively bracing his arm across Faith as if protecting a child. Relief washed through him as her fragile body stirred faintly, still clinging. Finally, the clinic's lights appeared through the storm. Dr. Whitaker and her team were waiting at the door, towels and heating pads in hand. They whisked Faith inside, voices sharp but focused. Thomas followed, soaked and breathless. For him, the world had shrunk to a single room, a single table, and the fragile flicker of one struggling heartbeat. Inside the clinic, 2 incubators glowed softly in the dim room. Hope stirred first, eyes brighter, paws twitching as if chasing dreams. Beside her, Faith lay frail and silent, her breath a fragile thread connecting her to life. Thomas stood rooted, soaked uniform clinging to him, watching both with a mix of fear and awe. 2 sisters, separated by fate, yet reunited by chance, fought parallel battles on warmed pads. Volunteers whispered their names, their story already spreading through the shelter. For Thomas, the sight pierced deeper than any memory. He had once stood helpless beside hospital machines, watching Margaret's chest rise and fall until it didn't. But here, against odds, tiny hearts refused to quit. 2 fragile survivors became more than animals. They became symbols of what still could be saved, of hope reborn in the darkest rain.
As Faith stabilized slowly, Carla Reyes returned with news. Rusty, the mother golden retriever, had been sighted deeper in the woods. She was thin, ribs sharp beneath her coat, but alive, and still fiercely guarding 3 remaining puppies. For days, she had led them from shelter to shelter, scavenging scraps, evading capture. To some, Rusty was just another stray, but to Thomas, she was more than that. She was a grieving mother who had made an impossible choice, leaving 2 behind to protect the others. He pictured her watching from shadows, heartbreaking as humans carried her abandoned babies away. Nature's instinct and a human's heartbreak had collided in one dog. And now, somewhere out there, Rusty still fought against hunger and fear, carrying 3 small sparks of life across a hostile world that had already failed her once. Word of the rescue spread quickly through the small New Hampshire town. Local families brought blankets, toys, and donations to the shelter. Children drew pictures of golden puppies with halos of hope, taping them to the walls. Retirees signed up to volunteer. Strangers stopped Thomas in the grocery store, asking about the 2 sisters they had read about online. For a man long accustomed to silence, it was overwhelming. He saw how a story of struggle could awaken kindness in others, how small lives could ignite compassion buried deep in weary hearts. Hope and faith were no longer nameless strays, they were beacons. And in their fight, the community saw its own reflection, fragile yet resilient, ordinary yet miraculous. Thomas realized he was no longer walking alone. What began as a roadside choice had become a movement of shared humanity.
Just as hope swelled, the storm struck again. One evening, Faith lay listless, her tiny body limp in Whitaker's arms. She refused food, her breaths shallow, her heartbeat faint. Panic surged through the clinic. Volunteers hushed their laughter. Tension cloaked the air. Thomas arrived to see Faith barely clinging, her fragile frame shaking with each attempt to survive. The memory slammed into him. Margaret, in her final moments, monitors flatlining while he could do nothing but hold her hand. He couldn't bear to lose again, not now. Whitaker worked with quiet urgency, adjusting fluids, whispering words of grit only Faith could hear. Minutes dragged like hours, every rise and fall of her chest watched by desperate eyes. Then, at last, Faith's trembling slowed. Her heartbeat steadied. She had teetered at the edge and clawed back. Relief crashed over Thomas like a breaking wave. That night, as Thomas sat by Faith's incubator, Dr. Whitaker placed a hand on his shoulder. She told him gently that if the sisters survived, they could not remain here forever. They would need families, homes, and freedom. Her words hit like a blow. He had poured pieces of his heart into these fragile lives, filling cracks Margaret's death had left. Now he faced another loss, not through tragedy, but by design. Could he watch them leave, knowing they might forget him? Could he let go, trusting others to guard what he had nearly died to save? The question lingered heavier than any storm. Outside, the wind rattled the shelter windows, a reminder that all bonds in life are fragile, temporary, and beautiful because of it. For Thomas, the hardest rescue would not be saving them. It would be releasing them.
Weeks turned to months, and the sisters grew stronger. Hope became bold, bounding across the enclosure with fearless curiosity. Faith remained cautious, but displayed quiet determination, climbing steadily, testing her limits each day. Volunteers designed challenges, scent trails, food puzzles, play that built confidence. Each success filled the shelter with quiet pride. Thomas watched their personalities bloom like wildflowers in spring after brutal frost. They were no longer fragile bundles wrapped in towels. They were thriving souls ready to step into the world. Still, every new skill carried a bittersweet edge for him. The more they grew, the closer the day of parting loomed. But in their bounding leaps and wagging tails, he found himself learning again, too. They showed him how to move forward after loss, not by forgetting, but by daring to grow anyway. As the sisters grew healthy and strong, the shelter began preparing adoption profiles. Families eager for golden retrievers flooded in with applications, touched by the viral story. Photos of hope and faith hung on the bulletin board, their progress charted proudly by staff. Volunteers debated which homes would be worthy. One family with children painted signs, begging for the chance to welcome them. Thomas listened quietly, heart sinking. He knew this was the goal all along, rescue leading to new beginnings. But knowing and feeling were different. He had carried them from the edge of death. They were entwined with his grief, his healing, his rediscovery of purpose. Watching strangers prepare to carry them away felt like preparing to lose a piece of himself all over again. The sisters had been saved for this moment. Still, his heart trembled.
On adoption day, the clinic buzzed with nervous energy. Crates lined with blankets awaited. Hope bounded inside hers eagerly, tail wagging, unaware of what it meant. Faith hesitated, head tilted, as if sensing the change. Thomas lifted each crate carefully, his hand shaking. Families gathered outside, smiling, hopeful, unaware of the storm raging inside his chest. Each step felt like walking away from a promise. He set the crates down, forcing himself to breathe. Children reached eager hands, laughter bubbling in the air. It should have been joyous, but for Thomas, the sight blurred through stinging eyes. He wanted to hold them forever, to shield them from every storm. Yet he knew the truth. Love sometimes meant letting go, even when every fiber of you screamed to keep holding on. The families crouched low as the crates opened. Hope bounded out instantly, tail wagging, leaping into gentle arms. Cheers erupted, her name ringing bright in the air. Faith lingered at the doorway, paws planted firmly inside, eyes scanning the unfamiliar world. Silence stretched. Then, slowly, she stepped forward, trembling, but moved toward open hands that waited with patience. When she finally climbed into waiting arms, the crowd exhaled in relief, as though witnessing courage born anew. For Thomas, the sound was muffled by his pounding heart. He stood apart, arms crossed tight, forcing back the ache. They were safe, loved, and free. Everything he had fought for. Yet watching them carried away felt like losing the last pieces of Margaret all over again. Still, he forced a smile, knowing love was never about possession, but about giving wings.
After the families left, the clinic seemed impossibly quiet.
The room that once rang with tiny yelps and padded paws now echoed only with absence. Thomas stood by the kennels, staring at the emptiness, his chest aching with silence. Dr. Whitaker approached with a small gift bag. Inside was a framed photograph. Thomas between the two incubators on the first day, face etched with concern, eyes brimming with unspoken hope. Beneath it, a simple inscription: "Every creature deserves a chance." Tears welled, unbidden. Margaret had said those words once. Now they returned to him through strangers who had never met her. For the first time in years, he felt grief soften, not as a wound, but as a memory guiding him forward. The emptiness of the kennels was real, but so was the fullness quietly blooming inside his heart. Weeks passed, and still Rusty roamed the woods, gaunt but determined. Then, one morning, Carla Reyes radioed in. She had successfully captured Rusty and her 3 remaining puppies near an abandoned shed. The mother resisted fiercely, growling and snapping, unwilling to let anyone close. But eventually, hunger gave way, and she was brought to the shelter, tail tucked, eyes wary. Volunteers gasped at her condition, thin, battered, yet unbroken. Her puppies clung to her side, trembling. For Thomas, seeing her in the kennel was like looking at raw survival itself. Rusty had done what mothers have always done: sacrificed, endured, and carried on. She had lost 2, yet she had saved 3. And now, against every odd, she and her entire family were alive, together again, under a roof where kindness outweighed cruelty.
During a weekend volunteer event, the shelter was filled with families, laughter, and wagging tails. To Thomas's astonishment, 2 familiar figures returned. Hope and Faith, thriving in their new homes, were brought by their adoptive families for a visit. Their coats gleamed golden, their eyes bright with joy. And across the room, Rusty lifted her head, ears pricking, tail hesitant but wagging. The moment seemed to pause, as if time itself bent. Hope bounded forward, barking in recognition. Faith followed more slowly, cautious yet steady. Rusty leaned down, nose quivering, then licked Faith's face gently, a gesture both tender and primal. Volunteers and families wiped tears, stunned into silence. Against all odds, a broken family touched each other once more, if only for a fleeting moment. For Thomas, it was proof that love leaves imprints even time cannot erase. The room overflowed with emotion. Children cried softly, parents held hands, and volunteers pressed tissues to their cheeks. Rusty's eyes glistened as she leaned against the crate bars, watching her daughters with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Hope wagged eagerly, pressing her body against the metal as if trying to climb through to be closer. Faith lingered, gaze steady, carrying both memory and resilience. For Thomas, the sight was unbearable, yet beautiful. He had carried them when they were dying, and now he watched them thrive, connected to their mother again. A lump rose in his throat, tears spilling unchecked. Margaret's face flashed in his mind, her laughter, her warmth. He realized then that healing doesn't come from erasing pain. It comes from letting new bonds bloom where old ones have broken. This reunion was more than survival. It was grace.
Seasons shifted, and Thomas kept returning to the shelter long after Hope and Faith had gone to their new lives. He mended fences, carried food bags, cleaned cages, and whispered to strays who trembled in fear. Solomon, his aging retriever, lay at his feet each night, tail wagging softly as if proud of him. The community grew stronger, families visiting often, children painting murals of rescued animals. And through it all, Thomas carried a quiet pride. He had not only saved lives, he had rediscovered his own. The ache of Margaret's absence remained, but it no longer hollowed him. Instead, it guided him, reminding him that love multiplies when shared. Rusty thrived with her litter. Hope and faith blossomed in their families, and Thomas walked lighter. He had found purpose again, not in grand gestures, but in everyday acts of care. On a quiet winter morning, Thomas drove the same stretch of Route 302 where everything began. Snow dusted the trees, silence lay heavy over the road. He pulled over, cutting the engine, and sat watching the forest. No dogs emerged, no commotion stirred. But he didn't need proof anymore. He knew they were out there. Rusty, her pups, hope and faith, living, thriving, and carrying pieces of his heart with them. He whispered into the cold air, repeating Margaret's words. Every creature has a story. Then, softly, he added his own, and sometimes we're brave enough to become part of it. The wind carried his breath away, and he smiled. As he pulled back onto the road, paw prints dotted the snowy shoulder, fresh, fleeting, and beautiful reminders that even the smallest lives can leave the deepest marks on the human heart.